Hi, welcome to lecture 4B. I think I got the lecture number right this time. I'm Tom Stephenson. This is Introduction to Construction, or as I like to say, Introduction to Construction Management. And we're continuing on with our discussion on construction supply chain practices. So in this section, we're going to be talking a little bit about the trades and sort of the process that a trade takes to become licensed and skilled and mastery of that particular trade. We'll also continue to talk a little bit about the basics of subcontracting and how we use fabricators, and prefabrication is becoming a more and more popular area in construction, and some of the process that are involved in securing labor, and that in the construction industry, a great deal of the subcontractors and suppliers are indeed unionized. So we'll talk a little bit about unions and sort of their roots and where they came from and what they do. So some of the stages of construction and the trades involved include site preparation. So you have, equipment operators, you have surveyors, you have people that get the site ready for the layout aspects, some grading, maybe some early demolition. We also have to think about the infrastructure for projects. So when we think about the supply chain, we also have to make sure that we have underground utilities provided and we have connections from hydro, from sewer and water main. Those connections have to be made from whatever building or structure we're making to get on the grid, as you would say, in many cases, right? In most cases, very few buildings are built off the grid. Off the grid is where it's self-sufficient. And of course, we have our footings, which support our buildings and structures. And again, we've got trades like laborers and carpenters, forming carpenters, that are installing the footings, the formwork. There's reinforcing rods that are installed, and there's different specialties of trades that actually do that work as well. It can be quite segmented, shall we say. So yeah, you can look through these different points and you can see some of the different areas of work and how some different areas of work involve perhaps many different trades. Like if we look at the structural envelope and we actually talk about the whole envelope, you can see that there's a lot of different trades that are involved, from laborers to bricklayers to concrete masons, roofers, elevator constructors, electricians. There can be a lot of different trades that can be involved in the structural element of the building and the finishes of the building as well, separating inside from outside. That's what the envelope does. It's the separation from conditioned space to unconditioned space, where you're air conditioned and it's heated, to where you're exposed to the elements. And we have to make our buildings watertight so that we don't get moisture entering the building, and that would cause a lot of damage to the building. So there's a lot that's involved in that as well. We want to make it energy efficient so that we don't have a lot of heat loss or in the summertime heat entering the building. So it has to be a viable envelope that's energy efficient, that also has a pleasing aesthetic and has some longevity to it. So a lot of trades involved in that. And then we could just think of the building systems, not just mechanical, but the building systems, all of the building systems. You got sprinkler systems, you got heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, you got plumbing systems, electrical systems, the security systems. So a lot of the systems, and we integrate the systems, even something as simple as doors today. Well, for a door in an airport, we have the door, the frame, okay, that might be installed by the carpenters that install that, but then you also have the hardware for the door, and the hardware for the door might be hooked up to the building automation system. So we have to run wires to the door, and the doors, who's hooking up the wires then to the hardware, and who is making sure that the connections that are made to the hardware can talk to the building automation systems, because high secure areas like airports and things like that, that has to work and that has to be integrated. So there's a lot of trades that can be involved in just the simple putting together of a door process. much more than in the past where it was just a carpenter. We hang it, we put the door closures on, and off we go. So just as a simple example. Interior finishing, final grading. And that's just a few examples. There's a lot more. All right, so in order to become a skilled tradesperson, one needs to complete an apprenticeship program. So what's that all about? Well, apprenticeship has been around for centuries, and it goes back to the old guild systems in Europe where somebody would take you on as an apprentice, and it was a big deal. If you were taken on as an apprentice, you were very fortunate because there was a lot of pride and prestige that went into a trade. And so you were probably taken on as an apprentice by a master of that trade. Back then, it was probably going to be a master carpenter or a master brick and stonemason. And you didn't have a ton of trades like we do now. And so if you got taken in, that person that was master of that trade would probably have you do all the lousy jobs for the first 3 or 4 years before they'd really start to get you to teach you and train you on how to master that trade. And it would take then another 4 or 5 years for you to actually master that particular trade area. And the term journey person came about in the sense that, well, once you sort of caught on to that trade, before you could fully master it, you should try different locations. You should learn in different environments. And so the journey person was that now tradesperson trying to go on their journey to master that particular trade. And eventually they would master the trade and they would start their own business. So a master carpenter or a master stonemason or a master artist like Leonardo da Vinci. There was a apprenticeship that was served during that process. If you ever look at the biography of Leonardo da Vinci, he went through an apprenticeship where he learned and then of course excelled and became beyond who was actually the master that was teaching him. So there's this process that's involved, and we still have that process today. It's a little bit different because it's what we'd call regulated. Government of Canada regulates trades. We have what we call red seal trades, and a red seal trade is a trade that's good across Canada. It's certified across Canada, with the exception of Quebec. I think there's always these exceptions that come into play. But pretty much all the other provinces accept red seal trades, and those are pretty predominant trades. Some provinces have even segmented other trades where other provinces may not have, but you get into the main trades like general carpenter, electrician, plumber, those sort of trade areas, they're pretty much red seal across Canada. And trades are designated into 2 areas: regulated compulsory or regulated voluntary. So compulsory means if you're going to work in that trade area, you need to have a license so that it ensures that a certain level of competence is in place. So like plumbing, electrical, sheet metal, those trades are regulated. Of course, you want to have plumbers regulated because there could be problems with the venting that could kill people if you got sewer gas entering into a building, or the potable water, drinkable water. It has to make sure that the piping systems are hooked up properly so you don't get contamination occurring from water that's not potable. So there's all these kind of things that go into compulsory trades. Voluntary trades is trades that aren't compulsory, but there's a certification and apprenticeship process there anyways. So if you're in a particular trade and it's a voluntary trade, I would definitely get my trade license. There may be job opportunities where the company is only looking for a certified trade. And we call that certification a certification of qualification. Sometimes it's also termed C of Q. So you have your C of Q, certification of qualification, and that's essentially your trade license. So it is really a prestigious thing to become a trade and to have that. And to be honest, in Canada at least, and most of Europe, you make a really good living if you have that trade qualification, because there's always somebody required to do that work, unless you're in a particular trade that's going maybe less and less work, like I mentioned plastering before. But generally speaking, that's a good area to be in. So the way it works in Canada is you get yourself registered as an apprentice. A company signs you on as an apprentice, and then you work a certain amount of hours and you go to school a certain amount of hours. So, for example, in the trade of carpentry, you go to school 3 times for 8 weeks. There's a basic, an intermediate, and advanced. So you'd probably work a year, go to school for 8 weeks, work a year, go to school for 8 weeks, work a year, go to school for 8 weeks. And if you have enough hours, so every trade has a certain amount of hours that they have to have worked. Some trades it's 5,800 hours, other trades it's 9,000 hours. Whatever that might be, once you have those hours, then you can write your examinations. So you go in and you write your examinations, and if you pass your examinations at a certain level, so to get Red Seal certified across the country, it's 70% as an example. And then you now can call yourself a licensed carpenter or a licensed electrician. And that's kind of the process that's involved in there. And there's a lot of involvement in what is in that trade, what kind of training is required. There's volunteers that sit on committees in the various provinces and on national committees that help to ensure that the certification for that trade remains current. I used to sit on the heads of apprenticeship training for Ontario. And so that was all the heads of the various different colleges when you're a head at particular college in the trade area. So at one point I was manager of apprenticeship operations at George Brown College. So that was sort of my process. So I got to learn a lot about sort of the nuances that goes on and the politics that goes on. With everything, there's politics as well. So that's sort of the trade process that gets involved. So many pathways, and I've kind of listed them out there. And these pathways, they're always changing with the ebbs and flows of government organization, etc. All I can say is that, if you're hiring people, it's in a compulsory area, they must have their trade license. If it's a voluntary area, if I was hiring people, I would definitely give a lot of credence to somebody that actually went through the whole process and got their license. As opposed to somebody that didn't. Does it mean that you can't be very good as a trade in a voluntary area? Or are there not very good carpenters that don't have the certification? There are very good carpenters that don't have the certification. Probably what happened with them, they did it the old school way. They worked with somebody that was really, really good, master of their trade, and they learned from them, and they taught them well, and they learned how to do things right. Definitely. But we do live in a very regulated society, so you'd want somebody that really knows the nuances of building codes, etc., in their particular trade area, so they're doing what they should be doing, because there's always changes in code requirements that go on. We also have in the construction supply chain, we have material suppliers, endless material suppliers. So this has just got you can just see in the image here, the 2 concrete trucks, and so one concrete truck's probably just about to get empty. This concrete truck is next in line. It's already backed up, and they fill it into buckets, and the buckets are taken up in the crane, and the crane drops it up in the formwork. In this particular case, I think the crane's for this building, puts it in the formwork for the walls that are going in on the upper floors, and then it buckets it back down. Or in other cases, it may pump the concrete to its location. It just depends what's seen to be the most efficient way of utilizing the cranes and the process on a particular project. So that's one example, but again, you'd have bricks being supplied, blocks being supplied, stone from a quarry being supplied, lumber. All of these are various suppliers that you will see. Kitchen cabinet suppliers, millwork suppliers. Then we have fabricators. So fabrication, this is becoming more and more pronounced because you can really sort of get into sort of a manufacturing process with fabrication, which means that you can cut time down. Instead of fabricating ductwork on site, it's much better to do it in a shop because the shop is better equipped for fabricating ducts. Otherwise, you're trying to set up a little mini shop on site, and it's probably not going to be as organized or as good as you've got a full-scale fabrication shop that is used to turning out things very, very quickly. So it's economies of scale, so to speak. The other thing with fabrication, if we get things fabricated in a shop, wow, then it's not taking up space on our site. That's a big deal. We're limited space, and if things get in the way while we're moving around logistically on the site, it takes a tremendous amount of time away from the work going on. So fabrication is a big bonus wherever we can prefabricate things. Now, always there's pluses and minuses. Traditionally in construction, the problem with prefabricating too many things is that maybe it doesn't fit when it arrives. Maybe something on site's not quite the way it should be. The advantages of BIM, building information modeling, we're able to do a lot of 3D planning, and we can look for interferences. Like we do this fancy duct system, and all of a sudden when we're on site we see a pipe running through right where we want to put the ducts, and we prefabricated the duct. That's going to be a problem. So the advantage is in BIM, in a BIM 3D model, you would have you'd have the pipe, you'd have the duct, and you'd see there's an interference there, and then you'd collaborate to work out that problem so that you could prefab the duct ahead of time and have it actually fit. In the past, we've missed too many things. So that's some of the advantages that's coming along, and that's where we're going to see more and more prefabrication take place. That will allow us to have more things going on in the prefab shops and shorten the assembly time on site. So there is a big movement that way, and this ties very much with lean construction thinking, integrated project delivery models, design build models as well. So as I kind of mentioned, you can kind of read through the slide and get the sense of that, but definitely prefab is got a lot of benefits where it's possible, where it makes sense, right? And you know, prefabrication avoids the need to transport so many skilled workers to the construction site. And the volume of workers sometimes on the construction site, we call it stacking of the trades or stacking of the work. You got a lot of people in a small area. You know what? In construction, things can go wrong. You can have accidents. It slows the work because people are in each other's way. Their materials are in each other's way. If it reduces that, it means frees up the crane, frees up the material hoist. It's a lot quicker and easier to do the work. So that gets us to our next little talk, unionized. And in construction, we have both. We have unionized workers and we have non-unionized workers. There has been a trend over the last 30 to 40 years towards less unionized workers in manufacturing and in the trade areas, but it's still in urban centers, unionization in construction is pretty solid. And so especially in institutional, commercial, industrial work and in production construction, like home building in production. Building custom homes, doing renovations, not so unionized. But the other sectors, pretty unionized. So you have to learn what are the union requirements, what are the hiring requirements. You have to learn what are the limits and restrictions, what are union pay rates, you know, for overtime and premium time. And those are all kind of constraints that you learn to work within. So there's been, as I said, there's overall, I would say in Canada overall, it's around 30%, the latest statistics on that. And that is unionized work. A lot of that's government work as well. So it really, again, unions evolved out of the craft guilds, pre-industrial revolution, if you will. The craft guilds, they kind of protected the trades. That was the other thing. They kind of joined. A craft guild was like if you were a carpentry guild, you kind of were like a community and you kind of set your rates and you tried to keep in common rates so that you could have a good living out of it. So there was that. Then, of course, the Industrial Revolution hit, and it kind of devastated the craft guilds in a lot of areas. And the whole idea of the Industrial Revolution is de-skilling, where you can take somebody and, like the pin example I gave in another lecture, you know, you can take it to a bunch of different specialties, and that person just does this, and they do that all day long, and they get very good at it, but they don't have the breadth of skills that a craft worker would have that mastered that particular trade. Well, unions developed as a result of when they de-skilled a lot of the work, especially in manufacturing. It put a lot of people out of work, and then they paid the workers very, very low wages, and they made them work long, long hours in very unsafe conditions. You had children, child labor, and all of those kind of things going on back in the days of the Industrial Revolution. So, you know, And if you were an individual worker and you complained, you were fired. That was pretty easy. You're gone. You're gone. Complain at all, look the wrong way, you're fired. So if you're an individual, you weren't going to change things too much. And so the balance of power was really with the company owners. So groups of workers where they were really being treated unfairly started to group together, and they started to fight the owners. And at that time, there was no real government legislation for unions. You know, the government would side with business owners, right? They'd say, what are they trying to do? And so it was a big mess. You had quite a bit of anarchy. And over time, we got regulated. Unions had a right to exist in North America. And again, you look at different states and different provinces, there can be different legislations. In Canada, if it's a union that crosses borders, like between provinces, then it's a national union. So then it is a federal issue. If it's just operating within a particular province, then it comes under provincial legislation. So there's these different nuanced difference. But generally in Canada, it is pretty easy to form a union, to be recognized, and then the employer has to negotiate with the particular union. So if you're a subcontractor and you're an electrician in electrical work, and your group of employees wants to become unionized, and they vote to have that process, then you're going to become a unionized employer, or you're going to go out of business, right? That has been very popular in the construction industry, and it's really at its roots. It came when balance of power was too much the wrong way. I always point to my students, especially at University of Toronto, when I teach a course in this to engineers in human resource management. The triangle shirtwaist factory fire. It was in the garment industry in New York City. They would change the fire doors shut, and there were fire escapes. They were chained shut because they didn't want the workers to go out and have a smoke or to take a break. So it was kind of almost like a mini prison. And of course, probably somebody was smoking inside, and you got all these garments, and the place lit up, and nobody could escape. The only way they could escape was jumping out the windows. So it was kind of a sad case. And the International Ladies Garment Union actually really fought hard after that to improve sweatshop conditions for workers' rights. And I would say that New York at the time probably went from one of the worst to one of the best as far as safety requirements for fire regulations and building requirements, and really, really sort of upped the game, and the rest of North America kind of followed suit. So I think that unions serve their purpose in a lot of ways, that we wouldn't be where we are now if it wasn't for unions. Sometimes the balance of power maybe goes too far, and unions have too much power, and then we're overpaying perhaps, and then some stuff goes offshore, and that's a globalization issue. There's this pendulum that kind of swings that I like to think that sort of offers a balance. If it goes too far one way, it comes back, and goes too far the other way, it comes back. Even people in construction in the non-unionized sector, they benefit from the work that unions had done decades and decades ago, because they helped to bring about a lot of the safety regulation requirements to ensure safe job sites, which then becomes a government regulated act like the Ontario Provincial Health and Safety Act and regulations for construction projects. A lot of the roots of these things were founded in some of the disasters, unfortunately, that happened previous. So these things evolve, and this is where we are in the construction industry, that we work with unions and what we call industrial relations in the construction industry, and in any industry, to be honest. So union contractors are those that have signed agreements with trade unions, have agreed that any workers they hire will be members of that union. An example would be LIUNA, Labor's International Union of North America. And of course they have locals throughout Ontario, and they pretty much handle the laborers that do all the form work for your commercial buildings and for your residential buildings. So very big entity. I think they have around 40,000 members in Ontario, a big organization representing that workforce. And you know what? Unions provide their workers with their own training on safety and other areas. So They can be advantageous for getting training out to the workforce. Other ones are the plumbers union and the electrical union. And so that can be in those particular areas. So again, you have different unions. The subcontractors that hire those trades are the ones that would be dealing directly because they're paying those employees, right? You as a general contractor hire those subcontractors. So there's those connections that take place that way. So non-unionized contractors are those contractors who have not signed any agreements with a trade union and are free to hire workers on their own terms, so that they don't have that issue. But you know what? You kind of have to look at your pay rates and unionized pay rates, which pays more, and you have to make sure that you're fitting into that scope, because you don't want your workers to leave for the unionized job if it's that much better. So there's differences and nuances. Some people that are really sort of ambitious don't want to work for a union because you kind of work within certain frameworks and certain rule requirements. Maybe more entrepreneurial would be a better word for it. But I'm not going to say pluses or minuses really, because I think each one has its benefits and you have to decide what sector. And sometimes you can't decide. As I mentioned, it just depends what has evolved in the sector that you're in, what's dominant, and what types of projects that you're going to be pricing in on. Open shop contractors, some contractors have an open shop arrangement whereby they're not signatory to union agreements and can hire trades that are either union or non-union. It just depends. Again, it depends on the company, and it depends on the situation at hand. So construction supply chain, other major parties that are involved that we didn't mention, all the regulatory authorities, think of that, right? And any of the regulatory authorities can put your project pretty much on stop or hold because you don't have the right approvals either for the permit or to pass an inspection, and things just stop. So definitely a big part of the supply chain is making sure that all the regulatory authorities are involved and that you are meeting their requirements and understanding what their requirements are well in advance of getting there. So that kind of, in summary, wraps up our discussions on the supply chain, but you have to consider the trades and you have to consider the process of becoming a trade and what that involved. And you're going to see some really wonderful craftspeople out there. You'll recognize it. Maybe in the beginning you might not notice, but you'll notice somebody, just a plumber, and how they're cutting their pipes and how they're putting it together and how they have this very slow is smooth, smooth is fast kind of attitude. They're not scrambling. They're just working very, very artfully, and it is, and I do mean artfully, with the tools and equipment that they're using, and you'll grow a lot of respect for those individuals. And I like to think about project management and construction management in the same way. It's a path to mastery. You're trying to master this particular area, this particular field, and a well-developed project manager or a well-developed site superintendent, it's kind of like they're like the conductor in an orchestra, coordinating and running all of those particular areas so that it could run really smoothly. And it's a wonder to watch when it's being done that way. So I hope this is sort of giving you an idea of the importance of supply chain to everything, not just construction, but we focused on construction, and how if we understand, the better we understand the supply chains, the better we can coordinate, work within it, build relationships, become masters of that area in project management. So I'm Tom Stephenson. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Have a wonderful day.